This chapter, Chapter 12, is longer than I wanted, so I split it into 2 sections. If you have not enjoyed the first section, please do.
And you are now the proud daddy of a bouncing baby girl. Amber, you will have to take Doug home by yourself. Alan, you are to go visit with your wife and new little girl. Alan had jumped up, he smiled and asked, Sheriff, what about Roger? Sheriff Murdoch replied, Roger is at my house. He can stay there until you get home. We'll talk later. Go. As Alan walked into the hospital, the receptionist greeted him, Captain Smith, your wife is in the solarium with your new daughter. He walked into the solarium to see Susan holding the baby. He asked, what's her name? Susan answered, her name is Elizabeth Pearl Smith. What do you think? He reached down to uncover the baby's face, Elizabeth Pearl Smith. You're beautiful, like your mommy. Alan sat down beside his wife, and they began to talk. One thing Susan made very clear, they were never to call her Lizzie or Liz. At home, Alan called Murdoch's house and asked Roger to come home. As Alan and Roger talked, Roger asked, what's her name? Alan answered, Elizabeth Pearl Smith. But your mom and I have agreed never to call her Lizzie or Liz, and you, my son, had better never call her Lizard Breath. Roger laughed uproariously, Lizard Breath, that's great, Dad. I'll have to remember that. Alan laughed, you can remember it, but you had better not let me, or your mother hear you call Elizabeth Lizard Breath. It was a week before Dr. David would release Susan and Elizabeth to go home. Roger had their Super 8 camera filming as the family's girls arrived home and entered the house. Months before, Alan had converted the guest room into a nursery, but Susan insisted that Elizabeth sleep in their room for the first several months. Because of the torture Susan endured at the hands of Seth Allen, she was unable to breastfeed Elizabeth, but she would hold the baby close and bottle feed her. Alan was a proud father, passing out cigars in the sheriff's office and extolling the beauty of his little daughter. The sheriff finally took Alan aside. We all have kids we are proud of, and I am happy for you and Susie, but your conversation around here is getting a little old. Keep it down, please. Alan was a little hurt, but he agreed to hold it down. Elizabeth had been born with blonde hair, but that soon fell out, to be replaced with hair that made Alan think of the little girl Charlie Brown was so infatuated with, red. Since Susan's role in the county was of an essential nature, and Alan's role was critical, it was imperative that they find a daycare for Elizabeth and Roger. It turned out that Amanda Murdoch wanted to care for the Smiths' children, and since Roger spent a great deal of time with Teresa anyway, to care for an infant and teen and get paid for it was perfect. Sheriff Murdoch encouraged this arrangement, mostly because it made Amanda very happy. Alan, Unit MV03, and Amber, Unit MV04, had their combined call sign changed to Charlie 1. All the other combined units were given Charlie call signs as well. Each officer retained their MV call signs, but partnerships had Charlie call signs. Do you remember what happened when Alan returned home after his first tour in Vietnam? Let me refresh your memory. Alan told Susan, my family threw me off the property. My dad said that they had held a funeral for me and that he never wanted to see me again. Remember that Alan had quit school and joined the army, and later, the Marines, so that he could send money home to support his family because his father had fallen and could no longer work the farm as he had before. Alan suffered greatly because of that. This was why he found it difficult to enter into any relationship with anyone. Although he seemed to be a good friend to his acquaintances, he could never allow himself to be close to anyone. Amber Clark was the only individual that had ever been allowed to really know him until he fell in love with Susan Allen. Amber's words to Susan about the relationship between Susan and Alan pointed to the fact that Susan and Alan had both been rejected by person or persons they loved. You're both damaged merchandise. The love Susan and Alan had for each other was the medicine that eased their pain and allowed them to know an intimate relationship with other people. Eventually, the Clark family and the Smith family had become the best of friends, drawing closer and closer. This then allowed both families to begin to reach out to other individuals, couples, and families to complete a circle of friends that loved and supported one another. The above is a prologue to what follows. Well sis, it's lunchtime, shall we take 7:10 out of service, at the truck stop? She replied, yeah, that would be great. Paul is up to his armpits building a carport, Sarah will fix him lunch. Let's do the truck stop. She keyed the radio, dispatch, Unit Charlie 1, request 7 at the truck stop, Unit Charlie 1, 10-4. Sitting, Waiting for their lunch, a woman walked in and spoke to the cashier. The cashier nodded and pointed toward Alan and Amber's table. Alan's back was to the cashier, so he was oblivious to the woman, but Amber remarked, "Bro, it looks like we are going to have company." About that time, the woman arrived at their table. "Please excuse me. I'm looking for Alan Smith." Alan looked up, then stood. "I'm Alan Smith." The woman looked at Alan. "I'm looking for Alan Arnold Smith of Twin Lakes Farm in Carson County." Alan grew cold, his face contorted, and he replied, "I'm sorry, madam, that Alan Smith is dead. You will find his grave there on Twin Lakes Farm on the north side of the house next to his dog, Hunter." Alan started to turn away when the woman said, "Alan, I'm your sister Barbara. It wasn't us girls, it was Mom. She was livid when you left. Tears were running down her face. Mom and Dad wouldn't let us girls see you. I'm so sorry." Alan turned back. "It was all Mom and Dad?" She sat, took Alan's hand. "No, it was all Mom. Dad only did what he did to have a little peace in the house. Dad and Mom are dead now, and everything has been laid on my shoulders." Alan was startled. Then he paused and said, "Barbara, this is my sister, Amber Clark. She has been my sister since my demise. I didn't think that I had other sisters." "How are your sisters?" Barbara continued to cry. "Alan, I am so sorry. Will you please forgive us?" Alan's hand squeezed Barbara's. "Yes. I have forgiven you and the other girls and Mom and Dad. It took years, a wonderful wife, a wonderful partner, and a sister, but I have come to terms with it. I forgive all of you." Barbara continued, tears in her eyes. "Dad said that you still sent money home, even after he threw you off the farm. That money kept us alive until Dad could sell the northern field to the Miranda family. Then he hired 2 of the Sullivan boys to work the farm. Things got better after that. Dad kept a record of every dollar you sent. Once we were back on our feet, Dad put money away in a secret account to pay you back someday. That's part of why I'm here." She held out a small bank book. "Here's the money Dad saved." Alan took the bank book. "You said part of the reason. What is the other part?" Barbara went on. "Mom called me in just before she died and asked me to tell you she was sorry, that she loved you and missed you. In the end, she was very proud of you. I wish she had known you had won the Medal of Honor." "How did you know about the medal?" Alan asked. Barbara replied, "I had only one clue to where you were. I knew you were a Marine, so first called the Marine Corps. I talked to a General Johnson who told me where you were and about the medal." Alan blinked. "Oh, pretty smart." Alan smiled at Barbara. "You have a car here?" She replied, "Yes." Alan went on, "After lunch, I'll lead you to our place, and you can rest there, till we finish our tour. My son might come in before I do. But just introduce yourself. I'll call my wife and let her know that you will be there, if that's okay." She replied, "I do want to meet your family." Lunch came. Then back to work. Alan led his sister to his house and let her in. After making sure she knew where things were, he and Amber returned to patrol duty. Amber said, "Your sister seems nice. Does this mean we are no longer brother and sister?" Alan noted the grin on her face. "My sister showing up here means nothing as far our relationship is concerned. We will be brother and sister for the rest of our lives and beyond." Alan pulled off the road and turned to Amber. "I love you sis, and I always will." She smiled. "I love you bro, and I always will." "Thank you." She leaned over and kissed him, then said, "Patrol." Alan returned to the road, and they returned to their vigilant duty. Unit Charlie 1, Dispatch. Report of an unauthorized individual in the water treatment plant in Whitmore. Handle 1040, no lights and siren. Amber replied, 10-4. Later they found a vagrant sleeping in a tool shed, and they told him to go to the rescue mission, where he could get a warm bed and a hot meal. This trip delayed their getting back home until 7. They took the patrol car to the sheriff's motor pool, clocked out, and took their own cars home. Alan walked into the house, and Roger ran up to him. "Dad, I've got an Aunt Barbara." Alan laughed. "You have more than that. My family had 4 girls, Barbara, Carrie, Deanna, and Elaine." Roger's eyes got big. "Really?" Alan replied, "Really, really." Susan came out, hugged Alan and asked, "Hungry, honey?" He answered, "Well, yes, I am." She kissed him. "Supper in 10 minutes. You guys wash up." As he walked by the living room, he saw that Barbara was seated on the sofa, smiling at something. "Why the smile, Barb?" She replied, "I like your little family." But the funniest thing, Roger came in first. I introduced myself to him and told him I was his aunt. He seemed very happy about that. Did you notice the look on his face when you told him he had 4 aunts? Alan replied, Roger was very happy to meet his Uncle Chet. I guess relatives are important to him. Barbara said, then I asked about his baby sister, and he said that her name was Lizard Breath. I have never laughed so hard. At least not since you told that joke about the banker in the cornfield, remember that? Where did he come up with Lizard Breath? Alan, ahem. I told him never to call his sister, Liz, Lizzie, or Lizard Breath. I guess he was just waiting to tell someone that. This one morning, Alan and Amber arrived at the sheriff's office, and as they entered, they saw Sheriff Murdoch signaling for quiet. The sheriff nodded to Alan and Amber to sit. Then he began, our friend and fellow officer, Steve Johnson died in his sleep last night. The sheriff was visibly shaken. Lost was an old friend and law enforcement officer, a loss everyone in the department felt deeply. I will be calling upon you all to assist me in the execution of his memorial service. Under Sheriff Johnson lost his battle with cancer about 6 months after he had retired. The Mountain View County Sheriff's Department mourned his passing deeply. He had been well liked and respected by his fellow officers and officers from many of the state's law enforcement agencies. He had been a soldier, a state police officer, and a sheriff's deputy, having served in all capacities with distinction and honor. Sheriff Murdoch had announced a memorial service for Steve across the state's communication system. Then the sheriff began receiving letters of condolence from most of the law enforcement agencies in the state and some from neighboring states. These letters always contained a desire to attend Steve's memorial service, a small check for Steve's family, and a check designated to help defray the expenses of Steve's memorial service and the reception. It was plain to see that no church in the county would suffice for Steve's memorial service. Sheriff Murdoch estimated that they would need to accommodate about 600 people for his service. Steve had expressed the desire to be buried in his sheriff's department uniform, and the sheriff ensured that it was done. He ensured to include every award ever given to Steve in recognition of his valor, honor, loyalty, and service. The weather was supposed to be mild with little wind, no precipitation, and temperatures in the mid-70s. And so, Sheriff Murdoch coordinated with the town to use the city park, and for as many bleachers, chairs and picnic benches available to be set up for the memorial service and reception. Sheriff Murdoch arranged everything himself. He planned the service in every detail. He told Alan that when he passed, he would like a memorial service like Steve's. Pastor Dan and the state police chaplain would officiate at the ceremony. Friends would be allowed to speak, and Steve's family members were encouraged to say a few words. And after the service, the route to the cemetery would be lined with police officers and deputies from every law enforcement agency in the state and some from neighboring states and jurisdictions. Steve's coffin was walnut and engraved on the cover with 2 badges, a state police badge, and a deputy's badge, each with his corresponding badge number. Also inscribed on the cover was the motto, "To protect and serve." The floral spray was arranged to resemble the badge the school children wore during the Deborah Jean Lacey investigation. At the end of the service, Alan, Amber, and George removed the spray and replaced it with the American flag. 6 officers from neighboring agencies carried Steve's coffin to the sheriff's department's van to transport to his final resting place. As the procession began, 4 motorcycle officers led the convoy 1039, lights and siren, followed by the sheriff department's van and 20 police cars as a rearguard. At the graveside, 6 officers stepped forward, removed the flag, folded it into the traditional triangle, and presented the flag to Steve's wife. A bugler played taps, and as Steve was lowered into the grave, 21 officers, standing in a line, drew their pistols and one by one fire a shot into the air. Steve had received a 21-gun salute. Beginning with Sheriff Murdoch and Captain Stevens of the state police, every officer in attendance dropped a white rose on Steve's casket. 600 white roses graced Steve's final resting place. His family and friends dropped a white and a red rose, along with many tears. Steve's headstone was engraved with his name, date of birth, date of death, and these words: husband, father, soldier, state police officer, deputy sheriff, in all a loyal American. Under that epitaph was the motto, "To protect and serve," and above everything, there were engraved facsimiles of Steve's 2 badges, state police and sheriff's department, each with the corresponding badge number clearly seen. Afterward, everyone gathered in the park for a little refreshment and time to remember an officer well respected and honored there in Mountain View County. During the reception, Sheriff Murdoch presented a check to Steve's wife for $100,000, all contributions from the law enforcement agencies in attendance that day. She broke down in tears. Steve's children gathered around her to help and comfort her in this hour of sorrow. Everyone attending maintained silence until the Johnson family left the reception. Everyone departed, each in their own heart, sorrowing for the hero they had just seen buried in honor and respect.